international condemnation as Israel bulldozes the headquarters of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees in occupied East Jerusalem. The UN says that razing the compound is against international law. So what are the implications? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Bulldozers moved in on Tuesday to flatten the headquarters of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees in occupied East Jerusalem. The action was met with international condemnation, led by the UN and backed even by Israeli allies like the UK and Germany. Joining soldiers and the wrecking crew at the site was far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who gleefully called it a historic day. A barbaric new era was the description of UNRWA's chief, Philippe Lazzarini. He pointed to Israeli officials jostling to claim credit. Some, like the deputy mayor of Israel's Jerusalem municipality, even called for the annihilation of UNRWA staff. Israel plans to build housing on the site, yet another illegal settlement on occupied land. So why is there such glee in Israel's government and anger elsewhere over this? And could Israel face any consequences for this latest breach of international law? We'll discuss all that with our guests shortly, but first, a report from Alexandra Byers.
Surrounded by Israeli forces, bulldozers demolish the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency's headquarters in occupied East Jerusalem, prompting condemnation around the globe, from the EU and Germany to Indonesia, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. The UN Secretary General called on Israel to immediately stop, saying its actions broke international law.
UNRWA facilities are United Nations facilities. An attack on UNRWA is an attack on the United Nations. And we believe that they should not be left unaddressed and unresponded to.
Israel seized the site last year and forced UN operations there to stop. On Tuesday, the UN says Israeli forces pushed out private security hired to guard the facility and confiscated electronic devices. UNRWA was created in 1949 to provide assistance to Palestinian refugees. There were 750,000 back then. Now it provides vital services to 5.9 million people. It runs schools, healthcare facilities, camps, and helps with small business loans. And not just in the occupied territories. It also operates in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, where large numbers of Palestinian refugees live. In 2024, Israel's parliament passed a law banning the agency from operating in the country and prohibited Israeli officials from having contact with it. Israel has long pushed for its dismantling, accusing it of bias and some of its members of involvement in the October 7th attacks. Of its 14,000 staff then working in Gaza, UNRWA found 9 people may have been involved and no longer work with them. And in October, the International Court of Justice ruled Israel is obliged to facilitate UNRWA's operations and has no jurisdiction over occupied East Jerusalem. But Israel regularly disregards international law. As the bulldozers went in, Israel's far-right national security minister was at the scene.
This is a historic day. It's a holiday, and it's a very important day for the governance in Jerusalem.
UNRWA's chief says this should send chills around the world, saying it is a new level of open and deliberate defiance of international law and an unprecedented attack against a United Nations agency and its premises. And he warned, if the global community allows this to continue without consequences, what happens to UNRWA could happen to any other international organization next, anywhere around the world. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. Shireen Salti is a political analyst who specialises in Palestine-Israeli public affairs. She joins us from Ramallah. Francesca Albanese is the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory and a former lawyer at UNRWA. She's in Tunis. And Gideon Levy is a columnist at Haaretz newspaper. He joins us from Tel Aviv. A warm welcome to you all. Shireen, let's start with you. Let's put aside the legality for just a moment. What does it do psychologically, politically, when Palestinians watch an agency's compound, a UN compound in occupied East Jerusalem, bulldozed? What message is Israel sending about who has rights and who doesn't?
Thank you, Adrian, for having me. And thank you for that important question. I didn't think we'd start with the psychological part, but it's actually of utmost importance. Let me just put some things in context. Specifically, Israel's recent decision to seize and demolish the UNRWA headquarters in occupied East Jerusalem is part of a long-running policy aimed at weakening and displacing the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory. So psychologically, it speaks to the ongoing psychological generational trauma that current Palestinian refugee populations are facing, saying, this is not just our story. This is a story of our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents since the 1948 Nakba. When will this stop? When will this psychological torture end? And when will Israel face accountability for its war crimes, for its ongoing displacement of our peoples, not just in East Jerusalem, with the demolition of the UNRWA main headquarters, which affects, of course, the region, but also across the entire world right now.
Francesca, would you agree with that? Is this the culmination of months of legal and logistical moves from banning UNRWA to seizing and now demolishing its headquarters? I mean, is there any doubt that this amounts to a coordinated policy to dismantle the international protection system for Palestinians? This is not just a series of isolated actions.
Absolutely, Adrian. This is not an isolated act, and I've been insisting for 2 years now that the international community must look at the totality of the conduct against the totality of the Palestinians as such that Israel is putting forward. And there are 3 elements that are striking to me. First of all, it's very painful to see the demolition. It's personally painful to see the demolition of those buildings and compounds. So this is precisely where I was working during my 3 years with UNRWA in Jerusalem. And this is the escalation of a decade, 2 decades long attack against UNRWA that started with smears, with attacks to its personnel. But in the last 2 years, 70% of the UNRWA premises have been destroyed in Gaza, even when they were sheltering civilians, displaced people. Over 290 UNRWA staff members have been killed. So, of course, there has been an increasing assault with the declaration, with the banning of the agency, etc. But there are other 2 elements, and I will be very quick. This is part and parcel. This is part and parcel of the erasure of Palestinian presence from what remains of historical Palestine. And UNRWA is a symbol, not just a UN agency, is a symbol of Palestinian refugees and their claims to return, which, by the way, these are rights and stay in international law. UNRWA, by the way, was created as ancillary to another body which was already dismantled, put to rest years ago, which is the UN Conciliation Commission for Palestine. So this is part of a long trajectory. And the last element is the United Nations. Israel is helping to dismantle the UN system, the multilateral system, brick by brick. And this is so symbolic, what's going on in Jerusalem. Of course, this would not be possible without the involvement of the US.
Gideon, help us understand, if you can, the mindset. We saw in Alex's report, National Security Minister Ben-Gvir appearing to celebrate. How much of this is driven by Ben-Gvir-style politics, and why is the broader Israeli establishment apparently so comfortable now adopting their agenda?
You see, Adrian, I was witnessing throughout my years many house demolitions in the West Bank, in Gaza, hundreds and maybe thousands. This is one of the most shocking ones because, I mean, in many cases, it was really a personal fate of a family, but this has so much more meaning. And to your question, Adrian, it's not Ben-Gvir. Forget about it. It is Israel. Let's stop believe that we have some radicals in the Israeli government, some fascists, and they are just some extremists, and all the rest is resisting those things. Ben-Gvir is the common Israeli sentiment today. He's for sure the face and the voice of this government, of Netanyahu, but it's far beyond it. UNRWA, for many years, reminded Israel that there is a problem of refugees, of millions of refugees, Palestinian refugees, that Israel is accountable and should be taken accountable for their fate. And therefore, Israel doesn't want to see this reminder day and night. Secondly, UNRWA is the only organization which supports Palestinians. But if all Palestinians are not human beings, all of them Hamas, all of them responsible for the 7th of October, so they are our enemies. And that's the way that the average Israeli see all this. And then you add that few, really less than a dozen workers out of tens of thousands of workers of UNRWA participated in the 7th of October, and you get exactly the formula that the Israelis are believing in it. No innocent Palestinians. Everyone was responsible for the 7th of October, and therefore they all deserve their punishment.
Shireen, as Alexandra reported, the compound itself has been empty for a considerable time now. But for Palestinians who rely on UNRWA services, what's been the fallout, and what's the longer-term damage to their lives and stability?
Yeah, this is, I agree with Francesca, this action targets the international support systems that have helped Palestinians survive, remain on their land, and defend their basic rights since they were first forcibly displaced in 1948. So since 1950, like your report mentioned, UNRWA has been the crucial lifeline for Palestinian refugees, providing essential services like healthcare, education, and social assistance to millions of people. And much of this work has been organized from the UNRWA compound in East Jerusalem, because UNRWA is by far, the largest international organization operating in the occupied Palestinian territory. Damaging its headquarters means it's likely to severely disrupt Palestinians' ability to meet their basic needs. We're talking basic needs. So that comes at a time when, obviously it goes without saying, when Palestinians face serious and immediate threats to their continued existence as a people in their homeland. And, Israel is fully aware of the size of history of UNRWA and its impact on the Palestinian people. So it's huge support, for providing those basic needs in the OPT. And so dismantling it, or in this case, literally demolishing it, means ending the only humanitarian lifeline available to Palestinians in those areas.
Francesca, with your legal hat on, UNRWA premises, as I understand it, fall under UN privileges and immunities. I mean, what does that mean? What does inviolability mean in practice? What are the legal consequences when a state simply ignores it? Who owns the land upon which the compound was standing?
Well, as far as I remember, the land on which the compound stands has moved from the Ottoman Empire to the Kingdom of Jordan as an administrator, even if it annexed the land at a certain point, but remains clearly occupied land. And therefore, Israel has no right whatsoever to do what it's doing. Is the only, I've said it many times, the only legal thing that Israel can do in the occupied Palestinian territory is withdrawing totally and unconditionally, as the International Court of Justice has ordered it already 1.5 years ago. Also, last year, the International Court of Justice reaffirmed that Israel has no right to obstruct UNRWA's operation. So, long story short, Israel is in blatant violation of the UN Convention on Privileges and Immunities. And it has already been taken before the International Court of Justice. So now it's about enforcing the law, which means that it's upon member states to stop treating Israel business as usual. The double standards toward the states are so in our face that it's putting the entire multilateral system into question, in the line. What's going to be the world after what Israel has done, is doing to the Palestinians? Member states should absolutely suspend all dealings, military, economic, political, strategic dealings with Israel. Otherwise, Israel will not stop. There is no other way around this.
Gideon, I mean, what does it tell us about Israeli impunity? Israel acts, the UN and others condemn, and then what? Nothing happens. What will it take for Israeli leaders to believe that there's any cost at all to acting like this?
Adrian, you need this for realizing that Israel is above the law, for sure above the international law. I mean, Israel has impunity about the mass killing in Gaza, about the destruction of Gaza, about the ethnic cleansing of 48, about so many things. Not this destruction experiences the Israeli impunity. The Israeli impunity is a fact, and we have to face it. Maybe in the coming years it will be changed. But I think that in most of the cases, Israel can do many things and many violations that no country in the world can do. No other country in the world. With all the talking about Israelis, how the whole world is against us, and anti-Semitism everywhere, the bottom line is that Israel can afford itself committing all kinds of violations of international law like no other country in the world. And this obviously includes this barbaric destruction of an international aid agency. It is an aid agency. It's not a nuclear facility, for God's sake. But Israel can do it, and therefore it is doing it, by the way. If you ask me why Israel is doing it, because it can do it.
Shireen, picking up on what both Gideon and Francesca were saying, the ICJ has been explicit. Israel must facilitate the work of UNRWA, respect the inviolability of UN premises. It has no jurisdiction over occupied East Jerusalem. When a state acts in direct contradiction to all three, and appears to get away with it, what does that tell Palestinians about whether international law is meant to protect them at all?
Well, Israeli action has resulted in the crumbling of the international rules-based order, like Francesca is suggesting, and the U.S. is giving the green light to cut any support for Palestinians in the OPT. So Palestinians feel hopeless, entirely hopeless, because it's outstanding that in the face of 28 months and what the ICJ has declared a plausible genocide taking place in Gaza, Western states have not let up in providing Israel with material and diplomatic support for their actions. And speaking of that double standard, and just to elaborate a little bit about it, in terms of how Palestinians continue to feel, when it comes to Greenland and Ukraine versus Gaza, it's the Palestinians are sick and tired of facing collective punishment and denial of their rights to basically exist and to have self-determination on their lands. Why are Palestinians facing this collective punishment, specifically in this case, Palestinian refugees, with badly needed relief, humanitarian aid, and development programming? I will say Palestinians are not surprised. What happened to UNRWA is already happening to other international organizations in the OPT. If I may remind our viewers, Israel deregistered 37 other international organizations that provide humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza on December 31st of 2025. And, this may also happen anywhere around the world. And we are already seeing how these threats of annexation of other countries by Trump and the pulling of U.S. funding to other prominent international organizations or UN groups. So international law for Palestinians has come under increasing attack for too long. They're tired of it. It's obvious to them that it's risking irrelevancy in the absence of the response by member states. Perhaps only very recently, like yesterday at Davos, is when Palestinians started seeing a shift in the way that member states, particularly Western states like Canada, France, or Britain, are responding to these threats, given that it is ironically now directly at their borders and affecting them for the first time and their allies in a century.
Francesca, I want to come back to what you were saying a few moments ago about the legality of this. The Secretary General has warned of legal repercussions at The Hague. What routes are actually open to him and the UN, though? Who can initiate? What would be the legal theory? Who, if anyone, is still prepared to enforce international law?
It's a critical question that we have had before us for the past 2 years and a half. I see what Israel has done as the culmination of the impunity that the international community has granted Israel since its very inception. Like Gideon said, from the very creation of Israel, Israel has never been held to account, not once, not for the forced displacement, not for the home demolitions, for the punitive measures, for the psychological torture that has inflicted on the Palestinians for generations. I don't even know how the Palestinians resist. So what the United Nations should do is to, and this is very resolutive, this is going to resolve for once the relationship and the vulnerability that Israel creates inside the United Nations. The United Nations have the responsibility, the obligations to enforce international law, not to continue to receive Israeli leaders at business as usual, but to make sure that they are arrested and brought to The Hague and to engage in investigations of crimes committed against the Palestinians themselves. There is no going back. And the way forward is either through accountability brought forward by each member state, or it will be a further escalation of the impunity that we have seen Israel carrying out until now.
Gideon, there are reports that Israel plans to build illegal settlement housing on the site. What message does that send to the world, if indeed it goes ahead with those plans? If a state can demolish UN property in occupied territory, ignore the Secretary General of the United Nations and face no immediate consequences, what does that tell us about the credibility of international law?
And the credibility of the international community and the credibility of the United States, which declares again and again for decades that they are opposing the settlements and they don't recognize the settlement and the settlements are illegal, like the entire international community. And Israel just ignores it and the international community does nothing about it. I just wanted to correct one term. I mean, it's not illegal outposts because all the settlements are illegal, and we don't have to make any separation between the outposts and the settlements. But what is happening in the last 2.5 years in the West Bank deserves a program by itself, because Francesca, who had not been for now a few years in the West Bank, you wouldn't recognize the West Bank if you would come now. You wouldn't recognize it. On the top of every hill, I'm there every week, on the top of each hill, you see new outposts. They take over hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, and maybe many times hundreds of thousands of dunams of land for themselves. All of them are violent like never before. And the Israeli army is guarding them passively and many times also actively participating in their pogroms. So all this is happening. The world knows that it is happening, and the world does nothing.
Shireen, we've got about 2 minutes left on the discussion. If this goes unanswered, what precedent does it set, not just for Palestinians, but for the entire UN system? As a Palestinian, what should member states be doing now if they want international law to mean anything in the future?
The only hope for someone like me, remains a new world order. After Carney's speech in Davos yesterday, we hope more leaders walk the walk and not just talk the talk when it comes to this fight for full sovereignty from Greenland to Gaza. We hope the action and the response is equal on all fronts, because currently Palestinians are seeing how this board of peace is being set up, and the founding charter actually urges, quote unquote, the courage to depart from institutions that have too often failed. And it explicitly calls for, quote unquote, a more nimble and effective international peace-building body. So it's clearly a direct reference to the United Nations and the post-World War II order and multilateral system. And so world leaders, I think, must reject this board of peace instead of joining it. And that could be the first step for them to walk the walk right now, especially now with Netanyahu's confirmation to join the board of peace. Okay. When he's in fact the person behind the crumbling of the international rules-based order.
Shireen, I'm sorry to cut you off. Francesca, I've got about a minute left. The head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, says that this should be a wake-up call. Is he right?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that this is the most serious attack really to the UN system represented by UNRWA, but again, it's a continuous escalation. And no, in the sense that the wake-up call is the fact that the UN is being dismantled brick by brick, both in New York, in Geneva, and in UNRWA. And it has been so over the past years, especially since the genocide in Gaza started. So yes, may this be the last act of impunity that Israel is allowed. This is my hope. I hope that this is the wake-up call for the international community in the context of lawlessness that it has ignited.
There, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it. We're out of time. Many thanks indeed, Shireen Salti, Francesca, Albanese, and Gideon Levy for being with us today. Thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story from me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Bye for now.